Kevin Walls didn't come to the countryside to fight a battle. He came because silence had started calling to him louder than the city ever did. After 20 years in Boston high-rises, deadlines, trains that never ran on time, he was done. He didn't hate the city. It had been kind to him, taught him how to earn, how to survive. But it hadn't taught him peace. The letter came in a manila envelope with one of those red string clasps and a law firm's name in black print across the top. Inside, a single-page notice and a thick packet of legal documents. Kevin's great-uncle Gerald had passed and left him something unexpected: a farmhouse, a barn, and a lot of land in a county Kevin had only driven through once, years ago, on his way to a hiking trip that got rained out. He went to see the place out of curiosity, more than anything. It was quiet, so quiet, in fact, that the stillness made his skin tingle the first few days. No sirens. No muffled shouts from the apartment next door. Just the wind pushing through the fields, the creaking of old wood, the low hum of insects in the distance, but the road. That's what struck him first. Dusty stretch was nothing more than a gravel lane that cut through his property like a scar, beginning at one end and running all the way to the opposite fence, where it met the county road. It wasn't paved. It wasn't lit. And according to the deed, it wasn't public either. It was his, and yet, cars traveled it. Every morning at 7, and again in the afternoon around 4, a steady stream of vehicles, minivans, trucks, sedans sped down that stretch of gravel like it belonged to them. Sometimes teenagers with their windows down and music up. Sometimes older folks with their dogs hanging out the passenger side. He didn't say anything at first. People waved, and he waved back. He was new. They had probably been using it long before Gerald passed. It wasn't worth starting a fire over. But then Jasper almost got hit. Jasper had been a rescue. German Shepherd mix. Smart, stubborn, loyal. Kevin had never had a dog growing up, but Jasper had become his companion, his reason to go outside even when the wind howled. That day, Kevin had let him out like he always did. A black SUV came around the bend too fast and clipped the edge of Jasper's rear leg. The vehicle didn't even stop. Kevin heard the yelp from inside the house. He carried Jasper in and laid him on the floor, hands trembling, not with panic, but with something called a rage. There had been warnings. He put up signs at both ends of dusty stretch. Private road. No trespassing. Vehicles will be reported. But they'd been torn down, or spray painted over with jokes. One of them had been used as firewood. Enough was enough. Kevin spent 2 weeks researching county codes, calling the clerk's office, digging into old records. Everything pointed back to the same truth: the road belonged to him. No public right-of-way, no easement, no shared access agreement. It wasn't even maintained by the county. The gravel, the ditch runoff, the signage, all his responsibility. And legally, that gave him rights, too, so he bought the gate. It wasn't just any gate. It was a heavy-duty, powder-coated steel barrier with a solar-powered keypad. Tall enough to stop trucks, wide enough to swing for emergency access, and flanked by concrete footings 3 feet deep. The installation crew said it would last 30 years, easy. He posted new signs. Bigger. Bolder. Private property. No public access. And beneath, in Spanish, propiedad privada. No hay paso público. He wasn't trying to make a statement. He was trying to keep people safe, including the ones who didn't think they were trespassing. The first week after the gate went up, he felt something in him unclench. The silence returned. Jasper limped a little but was healing well. And for a moment, Kevin thought that would be the end of it. He was wrong. The letter arrived on a Monday. Different envelope this time. HOA letterhead. Maple Ridge Homeowners Association. The name at the bottom: Karen Snow. HOA president. Kevin had heard the name in passing from the local cafe owner, who once muttered, Karen Snow would pave the whole county if they let her. The letter was formal, but the tone made Kevin feel like a schoolboy being scolded. The community, it said, had historically relied on dusty stretch for access to the main road. Blocking it was a hostile act that had inconvenienced dozens of residents and potentially violated established community expectations. Kevin was strongly urged to remove the gate or face legal escalation. He reread it twice before setting it down. Then he left. He hadn't laughed like that in months. He wrote back short and polite. Informed them the road was private, that all property records could be verified at the county office, and that he welcomed any legal challenge they wished to bring. Within a week, Karen Snow was on his doorstep, blonde hair pinned tight, designer sunglasses, a clipboard under one arm and a pair of heels that sank into the gravel. "We need to talk," she said. Kevin stepped out, shutting the door behind him. Jasper, curious, pushed past his legs and sat at his feet. "I don't take kindly to threats," Kevin said. "It's not a threat," she replied. "It's a warning. You shut down a vital access road." He pointed to the freshly posted deed record near the gate. "This land has never been public. Common use over time establishes communal rights," Karen replied smugly. "You read that in a blog post or a court ruling?" She flinched. "Because if it's the latter," he said calmly, "you know that prescriptive easement claims don't apply when the landowner has clearly and consistently denied access." "Which I have." Karen's lips tightened. "Leave the gate up, and we'll see you in court," she said, and then she turned and walked back to her Lexus, her heels clicking against the tension between them. Kevin stood on the porch long after the car disappeared. He knew this wasn't over. He just didn't know how far it would go. Kevin knew enough about people to understand that silence didn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it meant scheming. The gate had quieted the road, but the air around Maple Ridge had become thick with whispers. They didn't wave at him anymore. Cars turned more slowly past his property. A man in a red flannel shirt paused at the fence line one morning, staring too long before walking off. It wasn't long before the retaliation began, not in court, not yet, but in quieter, pettier ways. He found his trash cans turned over one morning, contents strewn across the gravel. Someone began calling in fake complaints about code violations. A county inspector even came by once, confused and apologetic, looking for a non-permitted structure that didn't exist. "It's not you," the inspector said as he left. "I've got 3 more like this today. Somebody's making calls." Kevin nodded. He knew who it was. Or at least, he knew what it was, an anger that couldn't let go of entitlement. He documented everything. Every incident. Every letter. He installed more security cameras, discreet, high resolution, and cloud-backed. One was angled directly at the gate. 2 covered the back property line. Another watched the barn and side trail. He wasn't preparing for a fight. He was ensuring he'd win it if it came. Alicia Grant entered the picture shortly after the second vandalism. The keypad had been ripped open one night, wires hanging like veins, plastic shattered. Someone had tried to weld the gate open and failed. Jasper barked for 20 minutes straight, pacing by the front window, tail stiff, ears back. Kevin reviewed the footage the next morning. There they were. Clear as day, Karen Snow. 2 others, both residents of Maple Ridge. One held a crowbar. One carried bolt cutters. Karen supervised. He drove into town the next morning and filed a police report, handed over the footage, and then walked straight into a small legal office 2 blocks from the courthouse. He'd heard of Alicia by reputation. Fierce. Methodical. An attorney who understood rural law better than most city judges. When he sat down across from her, she asked only one question. "Do you want to stop this, or do you want to end it?" He said, "I want them to understand what they've done." "Good," she replied. "Because they're about to learn." Alicia filed both criminal complaints and a civil suit within 2 weeks. The charges: trespass, vandalism, destruction of private property, malicious intent. The civil case added financial damages, emotional distress, legal fees, injunctive relief. Word spread fast. Maple Ridge buzzed with fear and fury. Karen, confident as ever, tried to rally the neighborhood, calling emergency HOA meetings and spinning stories about community access and heritage rights. But Alicia was ready. She brought historical maps from the county archives, some dating back to the 1920s. She compiled a timeline of road usage, surveys, and photographs showing the private status of Dusty Stretch. She even found an old letter from Gerald, filed with the county clerk, denying easement requests from the original subdivision developers. Kevin watched all this unfold with a strange detachment. It was surreal. His life, his quiet land, now printed on court dockets, analyzed by attorneys and judges. The courtroom was packed on the first hearing day. Locals, media, even law students from the state college had come to observe what had quietly become a landmark rural property case. Karen took the stand with confidence, speaking of public use, community expectation, and historic right-of-way. Her lawyer tried to invoke prescriptive easement claims and argued that Kevin's long-deceased uncle had implicitly allowed access. Alicia stood, calm, dressed in gray. "Your Honor," she said, holding up a copy of the county's road registry. "Dusty Stretch is not on this list. It is not a county-maintained road. There is no easement on record. And we have video evidence of the defendants vandalizing a private gate." She paused. "The only thing that's been passed down is arrogance, not legal rights." The judge was a tall, elderly man who rarely smiled. He had served in rural courts for 40 years and understood property law down to the dirt. He ruled swiftly. The criminal case moved to trial. Karen and her accomplices were charged, and the civil court granted Kevin full injunctive relief. The gate would remain. The road was private. The HOA had no claim, no access, and no basis for future petition. Damages were assessed, including legal fees, and the judge issued a written statement that included the words, "Community usage does not equate to legal ownership." This court reaffirms the inviolability of private land and the protections guaranteed by due process, regardless of public inconvenience or emotional appeal. Karen's nose reign ended that day. She was removed as HOA president in a 73-12 vote. Her name disappeared from neighborhood posts. A week later, her house went up for sale. Kevin didn't celebrate. He didn't even tell anyone. He simply replaced the gate keypad, planted a few more shrubs near the trail, and repaired the bent post himself. The town changed after that. Something subtle shifted. Kevin was no longer a stranger. People waved again. Some even apologized quietly, in passing, or with small acts of kindness. A pie left on the porch, a thank you note slipped into his mailbox, an invitation to a community barbecue. He didn't attend at first. He needed time, but by the end of the summer, he walked into a neighborhood event and was greeted not with side eyes or whispered curses but smiles. Omar Fielding approached him with a plate of ribs and a fresh lemonade. "Hell of a thing," Omar said. Kevin just nodded. "You taught us something," Omar added. "Not just about boundaries, but about how we forgot to ask permission in the first place." Kevin raised his glass. "To remembering," he said, and that was the beginning of something new. The gate remained. Dusty Stretch stayed private. But Kevin created a walking path beside it, open to the community. He posted a sign, "This is shared space by choice, not obligation." Kids walked it. Dogs chased balls along it. And not once did anyone try to drive through again. He and Alicia stayed in touch. She helped him set up a land trust for the property, ensuring that no future developer, HOA, or local ordinance could change its private status. She also introduced him to a land stewardship group, farmers, ranchers, and landowners across the country sharing similar battles. Kevin started writing. First blog posts, then essays. Eventually, a full book, The Line That Holds, part memoir, part legal guide, part meditation on what it means to draw a boundary in a world that doesn't like to hear the word no. It found readers. Rural libraries stocked it. Lawyers cited it. A few HOA boards even bought copies. One reader wrote, "Your story helped me stop a logging road from cutting through my granddad's forest." I didn't know what I could say until you showed me how. Kevin didn't reply to every message, but he read them all. He kept walking Jasper down dusty stretch every morning. The dog had a limp now, permanent but manageable. The trail had changed both of them, but it wasn't about victory anymore. It was about ownership, not just of land but of self. Kevin's farmhouse had never been so quiet, but this quiet was different. It wasn't the silence of isolation anymore. It was the stillness of resolution. Nearly 3 years had passed since the gate had gone up. What once was a gravel shortcut filled with strangers' tires and entitlement was now a clean line between two kinds of lives, one of ownership, the other of assumption. That gate had started as a barrier, but it became something more. It became a statement of will. And once it stood, Kevin realized something important. Most people didn't push boundaries because they were cruel. They pushed them because they had never been taught to recognize them. For a long time, Kevin had thought the battle over Dusty Stretch would define the end of something, a final act of setting the record straight. But life had other plans. Because after the conflict was over, after Karen's no was removed, after the court ruling stood firm and public opinion shifted in his favor, something strange happened. People started listening. They didn't come all at once. It began with a young couple who had recently bought a small property at the far edge of Maple Ridge. They brought cookies and asked if Kevin could take a look at their deed. They were worried that the wooded trail behind their lot might actually belong to someone else. It turned out they were right to worry. It was the edge of a farmer's field, not a public path. Kevin showed them how to pull up old survey records and how to contact the assessor's office. He even helped them put up a tasteful, legal sign. From there, word spread. It wasn't that Kevin had become some celebrity. In truth, he preferred most days without visitors. But over time, he became a kind of quiet authority, someone people trusted when things got murky. It wasn't about power. It was about presence. He had stood his ground without shouting. He had defended what was his, but he'd done it with patience, knowledge, and something most of his opponents lacked: humility. By the second spring after the trial, Kevin's land was in better shape than it had ever been. The fruit trees were finally mature, blossoming full and thick. The orchard had started producing real yields. He donated much of it to local food pantries. Some he traded with neighbors. The rest he canned, quietly, during long afternoons filled with the low hum of jazz from his kitchen radio. He had also started writing. The blog came first: short posts about rural living, property law tips, and reflections on peace. Then came the interviews. A local newspaper featured his story. Then a land stewardship group. Then a podcast hosted by a pair of young veterans who were building off-grid cabins in New Hampshire. Kevin had always assumed the public would lose interest quickly. But they didn't. Because his story wasn't just about a man and a road. It was about a country wrestling with what it means to own something in a world increasingly obsessed with access and convenience. He began getting letters from around the country. One was from a rancher in Montana, fighting an illegal ATV trail that had been cutting across his rangeland for a decade. Another was from a widow in rural Alabama whose neighbors refused to respect her tree line. A third was from a teacher in Missouri who wanted to start a land literacy program at her school and asked if she could use his blog posts as teaching material. Kevin replied to everyone. He didn't see himself as a teacher, but he realized now how much power there was in just knowing your rights. Not fighting, not raging, not suing first, but simply being informed, clear, and confident. And when that didn't work, being prepared to take it to court and win. He teamed up again with Alicia Grant, his old attorney, who had become something of a friend. Together, they launched a small project, the Boundary Book, a free downloadable guide that covered the basics of land ownership, fencing law, signage standards, trespass definitions, and more. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest, and it was clear. Tens of thousands downloaded it in the first year. Meanwhile, life on Kevin's land deepened. He built a greenhouse near the old barn and started growing vegetables year-round. He adopted another dog not to replace Jasper, who had passed peacefully one fall evening, but to continue the rhythm of companionship that had become a part of him. The new dog, Rosie, was younger, leaner, more excitable, but every bit as loyal. She loved to run the fence line, chasing shadows and birds, never straying from the path. Kevin's days were simple. He woke early, fed Rosie, walked the field, checked the cameras not because he feared anything anymore, but out of habit. He worked the land, one footstep at a time. He didn't owe anyone anything, but he gave freely anyway. His life, once the subject of conflict and courtroom drama, had become a kind of quiet ministry of order. Then came the letter from the state. The Land Use Planning Commission was creating a new Rural Policy Advisory Council. They were selecting representatives from each region: farmers, planners, conservationists, and yes, private landowners. Kevin's name had come up. More than once, he almost threw the letter away. But he didn't. A week later, he was in a Zoom meeting with lawyers, lawmakers, professors, and land use scientists. He didn't say much at first. But when the talk turned to public access trails and the increasing pressure to open rural land to development for the good of the community, Kevin leaned into his mic and said clearly, "I've got no issue with public good. But you don't get to define what's good by pretending that ownership is selfish. The land teaches you something when you work it, when you keep it. And if you want access, you ask. You don't take." It wasn't a threat. It was a truth. The room went quiet, and then the moderator said, "Mr. Walls, we'd like to formally invite you to co-author the regional standards section of our next draft." So he did. He spent months writing, editing, pushing back on clauses that were too vague, loopholes that would become weapons in the wrong hands. He didn't win every battle, but he won the ones that mattered, and as he worked, something else began to grow inside him: not just clarity, but peace. One afternoon, walking the path beside dusty stretch now sealed with a new gate and solar sensor, Kevin stopped and looked over the old road. He thought about Karen's no. He hadn't heard from her in over 2 years. He wondered where she was. Whether she still felt justified. Whether she'd ever truly understood the damage she caused not just to him, but to the people she claimed to represent. He would never know. And he no longer needed to. A boy from Maple Ridge rode past on his bike, along the trail Kevin had built next to the road. The trail was public by choice, not by force. It ran alongside dusty stretch but never crossed into it. At the entrance, a sign read, "Jasper's Run. This trail exists because someone protected what was his and chose to share what he could." The boy waved. Kevin waved back. That evening, he sat on the porch with Rosie at his feet and looked out over the fields. He no longer worried about who might try to take what wasn't theirs. He had learned that a gate was just a start. The real defense came from vigilance, knowledge, and patience, and he had all three now. The sun dipped low. The orchard rustled. And somewhere beyond the edge of it all, Kevin Walls, the man who once just wanted to live quietly, had become something else. Not a hero. Not a martyr, just a man who drew a line and held it, and in doing so, he gave others the courage to do the same.